Let's get started. So for those of you guys who've just been filtering in, I just wanted to say welcome. Thank you for joining us today about our Let's Talk About Chemistry invited talk with Ethan Liu. Ethan Liu is currently a rising sophomore at Yale University. I'm sure he'll want to give his own introduction. So Ethan, if you uh, like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Ethan. I'm a rising sophomore at Yale, like Sean said, and my interests currently are chemistry and economics. I'm graduated Montgomery High School, and outside of academics, I like reading. I like taking walks in community, and I love taking photographs. Photography is actually something that I just got back into this summer. I took a photo class in ninth grade in my freshman year of high school, and then kind of put it down after that. Get back to that this summer. And I'm looking forward to going to campus in the fall.
All right, thanks, Ethan. So how this is going to work is that we're going to have a various pre-prepared questions involving four different topics ranging from high school to Ethan's personal advice from his wisdom and experience. So if you have any of your own personal questions, feel free to private message either me or Zara or you. We'll be receiving those questions and also asking those to Ethan. So feel free to reach out to us through that means. But without further ado, let's get into our questions. So first, we're going to start talking about the high school experience. So Ethan, tell us a little bit about your high school experience. So some of the classes you took, extracurriculars, things like that.
Sure thing. So like I had mentioned before, I graduated Montgomery High School in New Jersey. It's a public school. And I think I had a really great time in high school, actually. I think I'll start first with some extracurriculars. I didn't actually do too many, but in the ones I did choose, I could focus a lot in. So one of my major ones was the Science Olympiad team. So I competed for our school Science Olympiad team all 4 years. And in my final year, in my senior year, I was actually a captain of the high school Science Olympiad team. So if you guys don't know what about Science Olympiad is, it's sort of a national competition that involves 23 different events, and each of these 23 different events covers a different area in STEM, right? So some can be civil engineering related, some can be chemistry related, some can be physics related, and so on and so forth, right? There's also a variety of skills involved, including testing, building, and doing labs. So this was a really, really fun opportunity. I love STEM. I've loved STEM since I was really young. So this was a great opportunity to do more STEM as well as meet some other people who are interested, because Science Olympiad, unlike many other science competitions, is collaborative, right? So each school takes a team of 15 people to compete. So this was a really awesome experience for me. And our school Science Olympiad team, MHS Science Olympiad team, is pretty hardcore because we have a strong legacy. We have a strong culture of Science Olympiad in our school. So we all invested a ton of time in it. And that was a major activity. And I had many great memories from it. Outside of that, I also founded our school's Montgomery American Chemical Society Club. Basically, this is sort of a community for people interested in chemistry throughout the grades who want to take their learning beyond our school curriculum. So one of the things that we often lack in school curriculums is enough labs, like comprehensive labs, in order to explore chemistry to a greater depth. Well, that's what we seek to supplement in ACS. For example, one time we did a silver where we deposited silver by reducing it, and we plated test tubes with silver. That was a really fun experiment, and my first time doing it actually, and it was a great success. And it was really awesome to see, everyone else, people in AP chemistry who were just learning about, learning about redox reactions. Then they were able to do a redox reaction in a test tube, and they were able to see it happen. And they were also able to see some real life silver, like pure silver, which is always really cool. So that was a great experience as well. I'm primarily interested in chemistry in terms of STEM interests. So this was a really great opportunity. I also love tutoring. I also love working with kids in terms of education. So that was also another great experience. And it was able to combine these two interests. So I really enjoyed that. Outside of STEM, I was also involved with our school newspaper, the Paw Print. Our school's mascot is the cougar. So Paw Print is sort of like a pun off of the fact that our mascot is a cougar. And I was a photographer and a writer for that. I wrote in every edition actually since my freshman year. And I covered a variety of topics from school events, student spotlights. One time I spotlighted one of our one of my champion chess players in my grade, internationally ranked champion chess player. So that was really fun. I also covered international news. For example, I believe it was 2018, if I'm not mistaken, the Winter Olympics held in North Korea. I wrote an article about the politics involved in such an event. So I had a lot of different experiences writing about different subject materials through my involvement with Paul Print, and I had a really great time there. And it was definitely something different than what I normally do with STEM, but it was great to also be involved in the humanities like that as well. Sean, did you also want to hear a little bit about classes as well for a high school experience? I can talk about that.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
All right. So I think for like in terms of classes, I was pretty balanced overall. Like, you have your core classes, you have your English, you have your history, you have your mathematics, you have your science. And I sort of just took that. I took the general path throughout high school, taking some AP. For example, I took the AP sciences, I took AP chemistry, biology, physics during my sophomore year, junior year, as well as senior year. But I didn't just limit myself to science classes. For example, my senior year, I took AP art history, which is probably one of my favorite classes I've ever taken. It was extremely interesting. I never looked at art the way I did until I got to art history. And we also had some really fun field trips. We went to the Metropolitan Museum, for example, in December before COVID-19 hit. So COVID-19 hit during the end of my senior year. So that was a bit unfortunate, but we were able to go to these field trips before then. And it was just really, really fun. Our teacher was great as well. If you're interested in learning more about global history through the lens of art, because art is, human expression, right? Closely related with human history, then AP art history is definitely a way to go. But other than that, I took mostly standard classes throughout high school. Nothing in particular. I guess I should mention that I took a class, probably similar classes are offered at other high schools too. In our high school, there's iSTEM-I, where basically you can do independent science research with the supervision of the science department supervisor. It was taught by him. And my project was actually designing an organic chemistry module class for our high school curriculum. So the way it works is that our high school's chemistry curriculum goes up to AP chemistry, and that's it. AP chemistry is the highest level class, but as some of you may know, AP chemistry is only general chemistry at the college level. The next step would be organic chemistry. Obviously, organic chemistry has a pretty bad reputation for being extremely difficult. So we weren't looking to teach organic chemistry to high school students, but we wanted to get them thinking about some important organic concepts, specifically through labs and applications. So that was my job. I took on that role, and working with the science department supervisor as well as our AP chemistry teacher sought to devise a course that would be pedagogically, beneficial for students interested in chemistry who took AP chemistry and want to take their chemistry to the next level through labs and through applications. So it was very interesting. I actually also got to explore a lot about chemical education. There's a huge field of chemical education, how best to teach chemistry to new students. And I was able to explore that. I never thought about chemistry in that way before. Unfortunately, I was not able to finish my project because of COVID-19. So I wasn't able to be in school to do the labs I was planning, but I was able to devise a theory class that was eventually implemented in the past academic year. So that was really exciting. I'm really glad to have been able to leave like a lasting impact on our school's curriculum like that.
All right, one quick question from the audience. What
Sure.
grade were you in when you founded the ACS club?
I was in my junior year. So I took AP chemistry. The first time I discovered chemistry was in my sophomore year when I took AP chemistry, and I immediately fell in love with the subject. And in my junior year, I decided to get more involved with chemistry through things like the ACS club.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so the next question is, what high school skills and experiences prepared you most for college?
So I feel that I have like several answers to this, because obviously all of like my high school skills and experiences were cumulative to prepare me for college. And I do feel confident in saying that I felt pretty prepared for college when I entered college. Montgomery High School has sort of a pretty competitive atmosphere. Perhaps some students might view it as a detriment because they view it as, potentially toxic, overly competitive. But as long as you're able to get through it, you come out stronger at the end. I was quite used to heavy workloads, managing my time, and important skills like that will serve you well in college. Also, in terms of getting ahead in terms of certain subjects, I took the National Chemistry Olympiad. I placed in the top 50 in my junior year, top 50 across the entire nation. So I was very proud of that achievement. In preparing for that competition, I explored a lot of chemistry that was more advanced than AP chemistry, more advanced than what you learn in high school. And I think that exploration, that learning process in preparing for the competition also really prepared me well for more advanced topics in college, in my first year of college. So I would say one in general, like high school experiences, and also my competition experience with the US NCO.
All right, I think we kind of covered this, so I'm gonna move right on to the next question. What draws you to the academic interest that you have?
Yeah, so chemistry, I'm just really fascinated by, this sort of like molecular world. That's why I'm really interested in terms of things like synthesis, right? How reactions occur and how we can use that to better humanity by synthesizing useful materials. So I'm not so much interested in just pure chemistry. I always look at it through application, which you might have already picked up on, given that I was emphasizing application in my high school experiences. But one thing I didn't really talk about is economics, because I didn't actually do that much economics in high school, but now I'm planning to double major in economics. The reason for that is because I think economics has, at the end of the day, the potential to solve a lot of global issues in terms of distribution, in terms of equity. I think economics has the key to that, and I'm passionate about potentially doing something along those lines.
Okay, so why did you choose to go to Yale for your undergrad studies?
That's a great question, because I definitely was doing a lot of thinking, because you really want to find a college that suits you, right? Especially if you're leaving home for the first time, going to a new place where you're going to meet new people. I eventually chose Yale because obviously it's very prestigious, but there's a couple other factors. One, Yale is extremely renowned in terms of subjects that I'm interested in. For example, chemistry and econ, it has historical specialties in those. For example, Gibbs, you might have heard about Gibbs free energy. Gibbs is actually I believe he was a Yale professor. He's certainly buried, his grave is near Yale campus because he was a New Haven resident for majority of his life. So that was really exciting. That's just one example of, Yale chemistry's prodigious, legacy, but also it's renowned for its economics. So I knew that I would be getting the best of what I wanted to get in college by going to Yale. Also, I heard a lot about its people there. Like the people at Yale, I have heard glowing things about, very smart, all very kind, very bright. And there's also a great culture, I think, at Yale College. It's not going to be overly competitive. In fact, it emphasizes liberal arts, it emphasizes interdisciplinary education, and all of these things are things that I'm interested to get in my college experience. So I guess in general, you really want to know exactly what you want to see in your college. For example, I wanted things specifically geared toward my major, as well as having a good, campus culture. And I think I found both of those in Yale, which is why I ended up going to choosing Yale College for my undergraduate studies.
All right, we're going to move on to the topic of college academics. So in your first year of college, what were your options with regards to social distancing and the learning environment? Because your first year of college was during the pandemic. So what are your experiences with that?
That's right. So like the beginning of my college experience, there's still a lot of unknowns about COVID-19. So we had a number of options. For first year students, so that would be me, we had the option of going on campus in the fall. So some students went onto campus and lived in dorms in the fall with certain restrictions, or you can stay at home and take remote lessons. This is because all lessons were going to be conducted remotely, with the exception of lab classes and studio classes, but those were in the vast minority. In terms of lectures and other seminars, they will all be conducted through Zoom. So that's sort of the two options that we had. In the spring semester, all first year students had to be remote unless you had some special exception, like you were an international student or something. But for me, it was just a decision really between going on campus and taking classes in my dorm in the fall or taking classes from home.
Okay, so why did you decide to choose a virtual school year?
Right. So eventually I did end up choosing to stay at home in the fall, and combining that with the fact that all freshmen had to be home in the spring, that would become a full virtual school year. My first year in college would be virtual entirely. And that was a difficult decision to make, especially since I was so eager to, get into Yale campus, right? To be a Yale student on campus, walking around the historical buildings. But in the end of the day, I decided that staying at home would afford me more flexibility in terms of like my learning, especially since all classes were going to be virtual anyways. They'll all be held on Zoom. If you go to campus, you'll be, kind of stuck in your room, taking virtual classes, just the same as people living at home. And there's always, of course, the possibility of contracting COVID-19, some other medical emergencies, lockdowns, isolation. We also students on campus had to be tested twice a week. So there's a lot of other, hassle that I felt would get in the way of effective learning if you decided to go onto campus in the fall. So I ended up deciding staying at home would be my best choice, even if it did mean I would have to delay my, entry onto campus as a Yale student.
All right, so what classes did you choose to take in your first year at Yale?
So in the fall and the spring, both semesters, I mostly took prerequisite classes for my two intended majors of chemistry and economics, but I also had some freedom to take some other classes that I was interested in. For example, in the fall, I took the first half of organic chemistry. I placed into organic chemistry because I felt prepared to take on organic chemistry instead of going to general chemistry. But I took organic chemistry. I also took introductory microeconomics. I also took a writing seminar that focused on how humans interpret history. That was a really fascinating class and also taught me how to write at the college level. And finally, I took intermediate modern Chinese for heritage speakers. So I have pretty strong listening and speaking abilities in Mandarin Chinese, but my writing and reading abilities were not up to scratch. So this was actually a really helpful class and I really enjoyed it. In the spring, a lot of my classes were continuations or natural progressions from the first semester. So I took the second half of organic chemistry. I took intro macroeconomics after taking intro micro in the fall. I took the next stage in my intermediate modern Chinese class. And I also took I was blanking there for a second, but I took a math class, a multivariable class in terms of multivariable calculus, because that was a prerequisite for both the chemistry and the economics major. And lastly, I took the fabulously interesting class of economic data analysis with statistics. That was my first time engaging with the subject in any capacity. I've never taken a statistics class before. I've never taken an economic data class. I've never even taken really a coding class before. So this was really interesting experience for me.
Okay, I think you talked about some of these, but why did you choose the courses you took?
The simple answer really is there are certain requirements that you have to fulfill in the first year, as well as certain requirements you need to fulfill for the major. So those two restrictions kind of guided my course selection for the first year.
So out of all the courses you took in your first year, what was your favorite and why did you enjoy it?
I would have to say that my intro microeconomics, not macroeconomics, microeconomics was my favorite class this year because it was held online, the econ department decided to do something really special for us, and they got together what they called an all-star team of economics professors. These professors have won multiple awards for their teaching as well as their economic research. So it was really awesome to be taught by this, tremendous amount of faculty, very renowned faculty members, and they all were really eager to engage with us. They used interesting teaching methods that were very interactive, and I really appreciated how much they genuinely cared about us, especially considering the fact that we were learning remotely during the pandemic. So, and this is, of course, all in addition to the fact that I learned a lot of really useful things in intro microeconomics that will serve as the foundation for my economics education moving forward. So I would have to say, all things considered, introductory microeconomics was my favorite class.
All right, we're going to start moving into college experience. So this includes extracurriculars and also just general experience.
Okay, so in college, how did you balance your workload?
So surprisingly, I didn't find the workload in college to be any worse than high school. Many oftentimes actually a little better. This might just be because I'm a first year currently right now. And also Yale's kind of known for having a very balanced workload in general. But I would have to say that the biggest factor would be to find a good schedule for yourself. A lot of my classes had assignments that were assigned the week ahead of time. So we had weekly assignments like problem sets that we had to do and then submit at a certain time each week. And just finding a schedule that works for you, that you can stick to every single week, was the most important aspect of balancing my workload. Because, for example, if I say I'm going to spend 2 hours on Saturday morning and knock out my microeconomics problem set, right? And if I stick to that every single week, I'll get used to it. It will become sort of a habit. And if I stick to it within the 2 hours, it won't drag on and leave me time to do other homework or do other things that I find more fun. Not that I don't find microeconomics problem sets fun, but there's certainly more engaging things out there than problem sets and homework, right? But in the end of the day, I think that balancing workload all comes down to finding a schedule that works for you.
All right, what have your student-professor relationships been like, your relationships with your professor? And how do you foster these kinds of relationships?
So normally student-professor relationships are an interesting thing, especially since a lot of the intro classes that you take as a first year are large lecture classes. Perhaps there are over 300 people in your lecture, right? And the professor's not going to know every one of you, right? They're not going to know every 500 names of their students. But this year added additional twist to it with being online, right? Some people feel like they can't connect with their professors or fellow classmates as much through Zoom than if they would in person, right? Or in a lecture hall. So I think that it was definitely an interesting challenge going in, and considering the situations, I think I did pretty well in fostering student-professor relationships between me and my professors, but there are certain things that I wish I would have done differently. Could I go back and redo the year? I think the most important part of fostering student-professor relationships is just being active in class. Certain classes, well, in fact, all my lecture classes, even the large ones, had opportunity for student participation. For example, the teacher would pose a question, even if you don't know the answer or you're not sure about your answer, give it a go, right? Show the teacher that you're engaged. Show them that you're a student that cares about what they're teaching and that they should get to know you, right? That's sort of how I, operated in my organic chemistry class. And then Professor Newhouse, my organic chemistry teacher for the first semester, he became one of my, I would say we have some of the closest student-professor relationships of all between me and any of my professors, right? I get to know Professor Newhouse more throughout the year, and I feel like our relationship is pretty good. And we'll talk more about Professor Newhouse later on, because he actually offered me a summer opportunity, which I think we'll get to in a bit. So in certain of other classes, for example, the larger lecture classes that had many teachers and many professors teaching at the same time, those were definitely harder to foster, but there are certain ways that you can do so. Even if you can't ask a question in class or answer a question the teacher poses, there are other opportunities for you to get to know them. one of the biggest ones is office hours. So every professor at Yale, as well as every other school out there, they will hold office hours every week. And basically you can go drop into the office hours, a very relaxed setting. You just ask them questions. And even if you don't have a question, stop by anyways and just talk to them, get to know them. You want to show the professor that you're very personable. And this is the thing I kind of regret. Starting at the beginning of the year and kind of going throughout the majority of the year, since I didn't have too many questions about the course material, I didn't really attend office hours that much, which is a mistake because these office hours, again, like I said, are not just for answering questions, right? They're also to get to know your professor and to build these student-professor relationships. They eventually even serve as the springboard for mentoring relationship between a professor and a student who's looking for a path in academia. So I kind of regret not going to more office hours, but it's something that I will be more aware of next semester when I enter campus in the fall.
Okay, so this school year, what extracurriculars were you involved in?
So this school year, I wasn't involved in too many extracurriculars. I'm looking to get involved in some more, but one of the biggest things I was involved in was Yale Undergraduate Science Olympiad. So I was involved in the Science Olympiad high school team in my high school years. Now, as part of the Yale Undergraduate Science Olympiad Planning Board, we are actually working to host a tournament at Yale University. So I actually attended the Yale University Invitational when I was representing my high school, and now I get to be the one organizing the Invitational, inviting schools across the Northeast to participate. This year was a little bit different because we were all doing it online because of COVID-19. And we were able to get over 20 schools from over 20 states to participate in the Yale Undergraduate Invitational. So that was really, really exciting for us. As the sub-director for the Yale Undergraduate Science Olympiad board this year, it was a really great experience getting to know all the other board members, as well as coordinating with coaches, coordinating with teachers and parents in order to address their queries to make sure that they knew what was going on with the Yale Invitational and basically make it as good of an experience for everyone as possible. Next year, I'll be rising up to the role of director. So I will be sort of managing everything in terms of from the upper level management position for Yale Undergraduate Science Olympiad. So that will be a new experience on its own, and I'm looking forward to it. But other than Yale Undergraduate Science Olympiad, I didn't really do too many extracurricular activities in terms of clubs. But on my own time, I actually did tutor privately some students in the local area because I stayed in New Jersey, as well as I worked part-time jobs throughout the year.
All right, so what are you working on now that's the summertime?
So I'm primarily doing research. I'm doing research in the chemistry department. In fact, in Professor Newhouse's lab, right? So this is an example of a student-professor relationship that benefited me and gave me a summer opportunity this year. I'm doing basically organic chemistry research, but since of COVID-19 restrictions, I'm doing a machine learning project actually to predict chemical reaction outcomes for certain organic reactions, specifically the 6-endo-radical cyclization reaction, which is really useful for pharmaceutical synthesis. And that's primarily what the Newhouse lab is interested in. So I'm really excited to be part of this project. I didn't have any experience with machine learning, AI, or coding that much in Python before this summer. So I've learned a lot, and I'm happy to say that it's going smoothly now.
Okay, so you talked a little about this in the last question, but could you tell us a bit more about your current research focus?
Sure. So traditionally, right, chemists would go into the lab and they wanted to run a reaction. So they would do a ton of empirical tests. So they would literally do the reaction physically and then collect some data. But this process can be time consuming and also a little bit wasteful in terms of you're using tons of chemicals and then producing a lot of chemical waste and potentially not get any results. So that's why scientists are often now turning to computational or machine learning methods to aid their synthesis. And that's sort of where I step in. Specifically, like I mentioned before, I'm working on a machine learning model to predict reaction yields for a certain type of reaction. So the application of this would be, say a lab or a pharmaceutical company wanted to run a reaction to synthesize a drug or a compound that had this sort of reaction as part of it. Well, now they can just look and run the machine learning model and then choose the conditions that would be most optimal to optimize their yield, basically to maximize how much product that you get, right? This will save so much time, it will save so much resources and money, and it has a big impact on the future of science and chemistry as a whole. As Dr. Newhouse often likes to say to us as a lab group, we're changing the way chemistry is done. So I think that sums it up pretty nicely.
You briefly alluded to this, so can you elaborate a little bit more about your work opportunities during your first year at college?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, a lot of my extracurricular time was used in part-time jobs. Specifically, I was a undergraduate technology assistant. So because we're on Zoom this year, right? The Zoom issues, Wi-Fi cutting out, microphone not working, all these sorts of issues can pop up that will, hamper the success of classes and lectures, right? Or, sometimes the professor wants to use a certain program, but they don't necessarily know how to implement it, right? Some professors are also on the older side, right? And aren't so familiar with this types of technology. That's sort of where I come in, right? And me and the other UTAs, we basically help the professor make sure the synchronous aspects of learning are as smooth as possible. So an example of some of my responsibilities include making sure the lectures are recorded, right? Taking attendance, as well as answering questions in the chat when the professor is lecturing. So I'm not necessarily involved with the subject material in any way, but I'm very important for the Zoom aspect of the class.
Okay, so what are your general thoughts about college work opportunities?
I think that they're quite plentiful if you're going out of your way to look for them, right? These opportunities are always there for undergraduates. You just have to apply and see if you get it. Sometimes there'll be a work opportunity that more aligned with your major, but other times you might find an opportunity as a UTA, for example, which is a more general position that as long as anyone has the know-how for Zoom, right, they'll be able to do. Generally, the responsibilities aren't going to be super specific for an undergraduate student unless you're getting a position in a lab or something, because they know that undergraduates probably don't necessarily have the expertise in very specific subjects or fields in order to be, contribute a lot and be worth their wages. But like I said, you can find opportunities like UTA that will give you some additional sources of income during the school year. And I think this is pretty nice. It also gives you some insight into the culture of working, right? Because after you graduate college, you're going to be in the workforce. So I think that's also a valuable experience to get the work culture in early. In terms of pay, I guess I thought I was paid pretty well, but I would say pay is probably going to be pretty close to minimum wage. I mean, that's just what they pay undergraduate students for these positions. Actually, in the fall, I'm going to be a Hopper College aide as my paid position. So with that, Yale has 14 residential colleges, and I'm living in Hopper College, or Grace Hopper College is the full name. And a Hopper College aide basically works with the administration staff in order to do office tasks. And I'm pretty excited with that because we play a pretty crucial role in the functioning of our college. And Yale, it's very important to have a lot of, college pride in a sense, because, sometimes there's a love-hate relationship between the other colleges. So I'm really happy to be able to help out my residential college as a Hopper College aide in the fall. So there's a wide variety of job opportunities. You just need to go out and look for them.
All right, our next part is going to be about Ethan's advice. All right, so how did you find your research and extracurricular opportunities? And also, what is your advice for finding these different opportunities? You briefly mentioned this, but could you elaborate a little bit more on this particular point?
Yeah, so I'll start with research. Um, every college has like programs for research, and that's sort of what I was working off of. For example, I knew for first years, Yale is actually really great in this aspect because Yale has a ton of fellowship funding opportunities for research, specifically for first years. They have this money, blocked out to fund first year researchers, which I think is really great because some opportunities, some schools may not have as many opportunities or as much opportunities, as much to give in such opportunities. But I was specifically looking at the first year summer research fellowship. So that is Yale's program. Basically, they provide a stipend of $2,500 for remote research or $4,000 for on-campus research. And basically that's your pay, that's your funding for your summer research experience. You have to find a lab mentor and you basically join the lab mentor's lab. This is probably going to be a professor or something in the faculty of the subject you're interested in. And then you'll basically do a research project that you and your lab mentor will agree on. So as I mentioned earlier, Professor Newhouse and I hit it off pretty well, right? So I eventually found the opportunity to join Professor Newhouse's organic chemistry lab. And specifically, he works in synthesis of organic chemistry, as well as applying computational and machine learning models in order to optimize that synthesis, and which is where I am today. I basically joined his lab, talk about the project, got to know a graduate student as my more direct mentor. And afterwards, I had to write a fellowship proposal. So science basically operates in that a lot of scientists, to get funding, they have to write proposals. I also had to write a proposal about my research, explaining how I was going to do it, what my goals were, as well as how I was planning to conduct it and what its impact will be. And after my fellowship application was approved, I could start working in Professor Newhouse's lab. And that's where I am today. So overall, I think the research opportunity was pretty straightforward because this program was publicly available, right? Anyone can apply. I guess the catch is to be able to find a research mentor, but Yale professors, and I'm sure professors at every other institution, are super eager to be working with undergraduates and, fostering their scientific careers. So you would be easily able to find a research mentor if you go out and look for it and show that you're really enthusiastic about their work. And afterwards, I wrote the application, and that's how I landed my research opportunity. As for extracurricular opportunities, I'll talk specifically about Yale Undergraduate Science Olympiad, how in my first year I was able to get a board position right away. There's the one factor would be Yale Undergraduate Science Olympiad tends to be a younger club. Like majority of the members are in freshman year or in their sophomore year. So in the first 2 years of college, because beyond that, you are often too busy with other research and such to be working on extracurricular opportunities. So that factor was there, but also I had to do an interview and show that I was really enthusiastic about working with Science Olympiad, but from a management and planning perspective. So you just have to know what you're looking for in terms of extracurricular opportunities. Every college has so many extracurricular opportunities for any types of interest that you have: dance, music, arts and crafts, probably. In this case, I was in Science Olympiad. I competed at Yale Undergraduate Invitational before, so I was really excited to be involved in planning it for the next year to support the Science Olympiad journeys of more high school students. So I knew what I was looking for, and I went through the application process and received my board member position.
So what are your thoughts about Yale's community, especially for freshmen?
That's a great question, especially since this year I had to interact with my fellow community members virtually, right? But I would say overall, it's a very supportive environment at Yale, because every student is extremely bright, and it's sometimes easy to feel like you don't belong there, right? There's so-called imposter syndrome, right? You're among a bunch of really smart and talented people, and you're not as smart and talented as them. Like, you don't deserve to be at Yale. Sometimes that students at Yale get that impression. But in order to combat that, everyone's super outgoing, right? Super willing to make friends, right? People are from all over the world, all over the country with so many different interests. And I think just talking with them, getting to know other people is one of the best parts about being at Yale. So I would say Yale's community is extremely opening, extremely welcoming for, freshmen, especially, as well as students of all grade levels. And if you were talking about academics, of course, I think I mentioned this before, it's a pretty laid back environment compared to some other schools. I've heard other top institutions can be pretty cutthroat, if you wanted to find a word for it. So I would say Yale definitely excels in being a supportive environment.
What is a funny moment in your freshman year that you can share with us?
Funny moment, let me think. Oh, okay, this is a great one. So in the second semester of my freshman year, I was in organic chemistry part 2, and I had a Professor Spiegel as my professor. So this is not Dr. Newhouse anymore. We switched to professor in the middle of the year as we moved on to the new class. Professor Spiegel was a phenomenal teacher, super knowledgeable about organic chemistry, very outgoing, and also a very understanding professor in that, he would often, understand why a student, or he would often, consider reducing the workload on us, pushing assignments back. So as students with really busy schedules, we would often really appreciate his consideration and his kindness in that aspect. But Professor Spiegel loved to tell stories. Okay, so he was quite the storyteller. Every class, he would pause for 15 minutes and take a 15-minute break. And then he would tell us a story. We would hear about so-and-so friend in a certain state, or so-and-so neurosurgeon friend. He has a lot of friends too, I guess. But one of his favorite activities to do during the 15-minute break period is to ask us to guess our hobby, or not our hobby, his hobby specifically. We spent about 2 weeks every class. I guess it's like a 20 questions thing or something. Basically, we had to pose a question saying, is your hobby so-and-so? Like, is your hobby done outdoors? Is your hobby, something sports related? And we had to try to guess his hobby. After 2 whole weeks of guessing, we finally managed to do it. And his hobby was making jewelry for his wife. And after that incident, I was like, okay, now we can go back to learning organic chemistry. But he's like, no, now it's your turn to guess your peer's hobby. So then we started going down the list in his roster, guessing each student's hobby. We only end up going through 3 students after him in terms of guessing their hobby before the school year ended. But that was certainly a very interesting experience. Very interesting guy. I can't say that guessing his hobby was my favorite part of organic chemistry, but it was certainly interesting. So I thought that was extremely funny because it was very random. I did not expect that from a Yale professor. And making jewelry for his wife is a very interesting hobby, I guess.
Okay, so it's a popular belief that intro college courses often teach you all the concepts that you've already learned. So what is one idea that you learned from an intro class that was like completely new to you?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think especially now that kids are taking, I say kids because they're really students who are just a couple of years younger than me, so I really shouldn't say that. But high school students are taking a lot of AP classes. I know I took a lot of AP classes in high school. I don't think that many, but AP classes basically are equivalent to a general introductory level college course in that subject. For example, AP chemistry might be equivalent to the first year of general chemistry in college. But some classes are like this indeed. For example, I would imagine that taking general chemistry again in college in my first year would not have been very interesting if you already had a solid foundation in AP chemistry. But my introductory to econometrics and statistical analysis, that class was completely new to me. And I think I've already hinted this earlier in the presentation where I said I never had any experience with statistics before. Yeah, so this class is a prerequisite for the economics major, which is another motivating factor why I took it. But I learned everything entirely new from that class and was very, very fascinating. Mostly we learned about statistical analysis methods on a basic level. We also learned about regression techniques, but one of my favorite parts of the class was coding. So one of the main tools that we used was R, the statistical learning coding language R. Didn't have any experience working with the language before, but through our applications and our practices and our lessons, I was able to pick up the language, and I now feel like my opportunities in terms of research and getting involved with different economics are greatly expanded because I learned this statistical programming language. Also, the statistical analysis is really helpful, especially since nowadays, economics and data go hand in hand, right? Economics used to be all about theory, but now it's all about data. So this class was not only new to me, but also extremely useful in terms of building skills needed for an economics career or economics research. That's why I think introductory to econometrics still always like blows my mind in terms of how much I learned from the class. It was completely new.
Or what advice would you give to prospective college freshmen, also high school students that are thinking about their college experience?
Yeah, so I'm going to start out with some cliche advice. Everyone says that you need to approach college with an open mind, right? And you hear that over and over again when you're entering college. And sometimes you think that it's just jargon, right? It's just words and empty words. But after going through my freshman year, I can really say that there's some serious truth behind those words, right? You never know what you're going to find. For example, when I came into college, I was pretty set on, doing chemistry as my major. But after taking some intro econ classes, because that was another thing I was kind of considering, but not really taking that seriously, I kind of fell in love with econ as a subject, right? And now I'm seriously considering it as a double major. So that's my example. Other people's examples might be they took a class that is really interesting to them and they just had a fun experience. For example, they might be STEM majors or pre-med, but then they took a writing class that made them really love writing. You just want to keep your options open because you'll never know what you'll find. And I guess this also goes along with meeting new people, right? Because we all kind of live in a bubble when we're in high school and middle school because we're just around with the same people grade after grade in the same local community. But in college, it's really cosmopolitan in the sense that there's people from all around the world, people with all different backgrounds and interests. And you want to be able to meet all these fascinating people, right? And you want to be able to, learn from them as well as become friends with them, right? And that's something that's really important, I think, in the modern college experience. So keeping an open mind also applies to that. You want to be able to take full advantage of everything that's being offered to you at whatever institution that you end up going to. And that often includes the people and your fellow students there.
All right, so that wraps up our pre-prepared questions. Thank you guys for listening. We'll stay on the Zoom up until 9 o'clock. Just in case you guys have any additional questions you want to ask Ethan, anything about his experience from high school to college and everything in between. So feel free to ask those now. We'll be sticking around for that and reading out those questions. And Ethan, you'll be answering those.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
So I just got a question in the chat. Besides STEM, what other extracurricula did you do in high school?
So I mentioned that I was involved with the school newspaper for all 4 years. So I wrote for the school newspaper. I was printed in every single issue, and I got the opportunity to write for all sorts of different topics. I covered some school events. I covered student spotlights, like I interviewed certain students. I also covered like global events, like I got my first introduction to writing about politics through the Paw Print. So it was not at all related to STEM, right? Because it was all about writing. It was all about thinking how to connect with your readers. And that was a completely new experience to me at the time. And I think I really grew as a writer from that. So I had great memories from writing as part of my school newspaper, the Paw Print. Oh, I should also mention that I was also a photographer for the school newspaper. So that was also really fun. I have a direct message in the chat. Do you recommend any materials for chemistry? So I used basically the school textbook a lot for my beginning studies for chemistry. And then afterwards, I often use some online resources. I could spend like hours like reading through different web pages about describing certain reactions, describing certain areas or fields in chemistry, right? You just have to be really, really persistent because there's so much to learn about the central science, so much to learn about chemistry that you can really go really deep into it. Can I give you any specifics? Absolutely. I think, let me see if I have a textbook right here. This is a really good one if you want to get more in depth in chemistry, but if you just want to get started, there's a number of introductory classes and textbooks available out there. But the one I basically used was Chemical Principles by Peter Atkins, right? This was a really great look into very in-depth inorganic and general chemistry, but generally that might be a little too advanced for beginners. You can convert, like you can ask your school what topics and what materials do they use, and you can get started from there. Also, in terms of if you want like extra help with your school stuff, Khan Academy is really great. I relied on that a ton in high school to supplement what I learned in school, and I couldn't recommend that website enough. Yes, Chemical Principles by Peter Atkins, Atkins, not napkins. Okay, can you talk a little bit about your college application experience and the preparation you did for it during 4 years of high school? Sure. So I guess like my major tip for college applications would be to start early. I started during the summer of the summer between my junior and senior years after I got back from the governor's school program. I should talk briefly about my governor's school program. So every state has a governor's school in the sciences, where basically it's a residential scholarship program, and you go to live on a college campus and you get to do research, and you basically get to experience college before college. And it was a really awesome experience for me. Before that, I never had really lived outside my home for extended periods of time, but I basically stayed at the governor's school for 3 whole weeks. And it was a really awesome experience. I got to meet some other students who were very passionate about sciences as well. And I got my first taste of real chemical research in the lab, running reactions, working with glassware, and it was just a fantastic experience overall. And I feel like that was my research experience that really got me interested in research. But afterwards, I got home and I started preparing for my college applications in the August of that year. So my top recommendation would be to start early with their applications if you're at that stage. Of course, oftentimes people get really, really stressed during the fall when they don't have enough time to write their essays. But if you start earlier, just even a couple months earlier, you can really alleviate that. In terms of preparation that I did for it, I would say that the best way to prepare for your college applications, now I'm not gonna counsel, I'm not a college counselor by any means, right? But a lot of the activities that I did that I eventually got leadership positions for and eventually made it on my college applications were not activities that I did specifically because I was like, Yale's gonna think this is gonna look really impressive, or Princeton's gonna really like this leadership program, right? I did it because I was really interested in it. I guess that's sort of reflected by the fact that I didn't do that many extracurriculars. I did probably at most like 4 or 5 school extracurriculars, and many were swapped out year after year. I just sort of did what I was really interested in. For example, Science Olympiad, I was really passionate about the community there. Paul Print, I love writing for the school newspaper and seeing my name in print, as well as gaining new knowledge about our school, the events it holds, as well as broader ideas that can be printed. And for ACS Club, the Montgomery American Chemical Society, I love teaching, right? I love tutoring, and I love talking about chemistry. So working with students who are also really interested in chemistry was a great experience. I just sort of did what I was interested in, and I think that carried me further than, selecting things specifically to prepare for college applications. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the pieces fall into place if you're doing what you love. That sounds cliche, but I really mean it. All right.
I just received a question in the chat. Could you talk a little bit more about your research? So I guess I'll go over some of the points that you mentioned earlier.
Are we talking about my high school research or my current research?
College research.
College research. Okay. Well, this is sort of like a presentation that I'm not going to go through all of it because it's a little long, but essentially this is a brief overview of my project. The bottom line is that I'm basically working on a machine learning model to predict the chemical reaction yields of a 6-endo-radical cyclization reaction, which is a type of organic reaction. This reaction is really useful for pharmaceutical synthesis, right? It's useful for synthesizing a number of drugs that are very important for combating critical diseases. And obviously, in the world of business and science, which pharmaceuticals kind of straddles both fields, right? It's really important to be efficient with your work, right? Too often, like scientists try too many times and it ends up costing a lot of money and uses a lot of resources and produces a lot of waste. Well, with more modern methods like machine learning and computational calculations, we can avoid a lot of that, right? We can be more efficient and be more selective. Specifically with my machine learning model, or maybe not necessarily my machine learning model, but machine learning models similar to my machine learning model. If a scientist wants to synthesize a certain compound with a certain reaction, they can use our model and predict what starting materials and what properties of the starting materials would be best in order to maximize how much useful product they get. Okay, so this will save a lot of time. It will save a lot of trial and error. And like I mentioned before, Dr. Newhouse always says that we're changing the way chemistry is being done. And I think that's a great way to summarize, the importance and power of modern computational methods in revolutionizing science research. So that's the main gist of what I'm doing. Specifically, I'm working with a number of machine learning models and working with both the R statistical programming language, which I have to say the intro to econometrics prepared me for, even though it wasn't a science class, as well as the Python language. So these are some of the things that I have prepared. And that is my general overview of my research. Of course, hopefully eventually I'll be able to go back into the lab and do some hands-on lab work like I did when in high school. But with COVID-19, we have some lab restrictions. So I am doing machine learning and computational work currently, but it's still been a great experience.
So that basically, I think, wraps up our invited talk today. Once again, thank you so much for coming. I hope this was informative. And a thank you to Ethan, big thank you to Ethan for being here and sharing his experience with us. So, yeah. That basically wraps up our talk. So I hope you guys have a great evening. Feel free to ask any final questions.
Thank you guys so much for coming and listening to me.